Hi there! If you want to integrate generative AI into your web apps, there is one skill you absolutely need to master: structured JSON responses. This is a complete game changer. People often get distracted by all those complicated AI topics, and they forget that this simple concept can unlock endless possibilities for web applications. In this video, you are going to learn how to call the Gemini API using VueJS and get a clean, structured response following a JSON schema. For this example, we are going to ask Gemini to generate a set of quiz questions based on a topic entered by the user. Since the response will be structured, we will be able to create a fully interactive quiz that users can engage with. And because we are working with AI, we have infinite possibilities. We can input simple topics like math or physics, or more specific requests like English B1 level tests, junior level JavaScript interview questions, and anything else you can think of. Let's dive in, but first, hit the like button and subscribe to the Web Schools. I'm working on several other AI-powered projects like this one, and I'm going to be sharing all of them here to my subscribers. Thanks for joining me today. Now let's head over to Visual Studio Code so we can get started. In this video, we're going to create a brand new VueJS project so we can get started. So first, let's go to File, Open Folder, and open the folder where you normally save your projects. Now let's open a new terminal window and let's type npm create Vite so we can create the new Vue project. I'm going to call it for Vue Quiz Generator. So let's choose VueJS, JavaScript, and now we can open the new folder created. Let's go to File, Open Folder again, select the new project, and click Open. Now let's open the terminal window one more time. Let's type npm I to install all dependencies. Now let's type Vite to start running the local server. We can now copy this URL and open it in the web browser. Now we can close the terminal. Let's go inside the source folder, and we are going to start from the app component. Let's delete everything so we can start fresh. So I'm going to delete this import from here, and inside the template, let's delete all HTML elements. I'm just going to type h1 and write Vue Quiz Generator. We can also delete the style tag we have down here, and inside the components folder, we can delete this component. Now go to the description of this video and copy the CSS code in the link that I left below. This is going to save us a lot of time. So let's copy the whole thing, and going inside the style.css, we can press Ctrl A to select and delete everything, and we can copy our CSS code instead. So we can save this, and this way we are not going to spend any time writing CSS. We are going to build all our components from scratch, but just for the CSS part, I decided to bring everything ready. But while we build our components, I'm going to be coming back here to explain to you how things work. So we can close this, and now we have the starting point of the project ready. Before we continue, there's just one thing I suggest you to do, which is to download and install the VueJS DevTools extension to Chrome, because this is going to make it easier for you to debug your application. So let me go to the VueJS documentation on vuejs.org. Let's go to search, and let's search for DevTools. So here we have the browser DevTools, and here we have the link to the Chrome extension. It's important that you go from here, because then you're going to make sure to get the most updated version of the extension. So you can click right here, and as you can see, I already have it installed in Google Chrome. If that's not the case for you, you can click the button to add it to your browser. Now we can close this, and we are ready to get started with this project. If you want to add the logo to the header, just like I have it on my final project, You can also find the link for the image file in the description of this video. So let's download it, go inside the projects folder, go inside source, and inside the assets folder, we can delete the Vue logo that we have here by default, and we can paste the one I left, which is called logo.png. Let me open it up. So this is the logo that I'm using for this project. Now going back there, if we go inside the assets from Visual Studio Code, we can see that the file is already here. So from the app.vue component, let's create the structure for the header. And here it is very important that you create the same elements and that you use the same classes I'm using. Otherwise, the CSS might not work correctly. So inside the template, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a div with an ID of app, like this. And inside here, I'm going to create a header element. Let me add a container inside. And right here, we can add the image for the logo. So the class is going to be logo, and the source is going to be /assets logo.png. Then right after the image, we can add the h1, and we can write the quiz generator. Saving this, we can see we have the header of the application with the correct styles, because remember that we already pasted all the CSS we are going to need. So if you go inside, you can see you have the styles for the container. If you scroll down a bit more, you can see all the styles for the header. So if you want to experiment with the CSS and change things, you can come here and you're going to find all the sections of the application right here. Down, we can see the image with a class of logo. So this is why we are seeing everything styled correctly. So I'm going to close the CSS file, and this is the header for the application. Now down here, we are going to start creating new components for the different screens of the application. And the first screen that we want to show the user is the start screen. This is where we are going to select a subject for the quiz. So let's go inside the components folder and let's click this button to create a new file, and let's name this start screen. Always start your component names with a capital letter. So start screen.view. Now let's add a template for this. I'm going to type start screen just so we can see if this is working. Let me save this, and now going back to the app component, inside the script setup tag, we are going to import this component. Remember that for this project, we are using the composition API, so all the logic is going to be done inside the script setup tag. So right inside here, I'm going to import start screen. Now Visual Studio Code is auto-completing this line for me. I can just press enter. So this way we are importing this component, and now we can use it just like a normal HTML element. So down here, right after the header component, let's create an element for the start screen. Don't forget to close the tag with the /, and when we save this, we can see the content of that component showing here. So we can now start working on it. Let me close the Explorer so we have a bit more space and go inside the start screen. So as I've mentioned, this is going to be where we're going to select the subject for the quiz. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a section. Again, it's very important that you use the same elements and classes I'm using. So section.start-screen. And I'm also going to add a class of container, just so we can have things lined up correctly. Inside this section, I'm going to add an h2. And let's write something like choose a topic to start testing your knowledge. Now we are going to add an input of type text. Let's add a placeholder for it. And we can type something like enter your topic. Now we also need to add a button. So let's do it right now. And the text of the button is going to be Start Quiz. So we save this, and now we see the start screen of the application ready. So the first thing we need is to add the script section so we can build the logic for this component. So let me add a script tag, and this is going to be a script setup tag, so we can use the composition API. Now, in order to capture the topic, we need to create a state variable. If we just create a variable, call it topic, we are not going to be able to have the application automatically updated when this value changes. So to work with state variables in Vue, either we work with ref or reactive. If you want to check that out in the documentation, go to VueJS.org, then go to Docs, Guide, and you can go to Reactivity Fundamentals. So as you can see, we need to import ref, so we can copy this line of code. We need to place it inside the script tag. Let's do it at the top. And then when we want to create a variable, this is how we are going to do it. We are going to use the ref function and pass the initial value between parentheses. So right here, we are going to use the ref function. And the initial value is going to be an empty topic. Now, having this variable reactive means that whenever we change its value, all the screens that use this variable will be automatically updated. And this is how we work with VueJS. Okay, now if we want to get the value of the input and send to this variable, this is very easy to do in VueJS. We don't have to do it only after the button is clicked. We can actually add the vModel directive and set it to the topic variable. So just to make a quick test, if we have a p tag down here and we use the double curly braces to use one of our variables and we output the value of topic, if we save this now, we can see that this is now blank because we don't have any value. But if we type something at the top here, let's say start, we can see that now it's showing in the input and it's showing down here. Now the value of this input field is always going to be up to date with the value of topic. And if we start typing something here, let's say we want to have a quiz about JavaScript, we can see the value changing down here dynamic. This is because we are using ref. So now that we know how this works, we can delete this and start with an empty value. And once we enter the topic, like JavaScript, and click Start Quiz, we are going to proceed to the next screen. However, I don't want this button to be clickable if we don't have anything inside here. So I'm going to add a dynamic attribute to the button, which is going to be the disabled. If you want to make it dynamic, you can use colon disabled. And then for the value, you can add a JavaScript logic. So for this, if we don't have anything in the topic, so if this is blank like it is now, this is going to return true and the button is going to be disabled. So we can save this and now we can see that the button is disabled. I can't click on it and it's showing with a low opacity because I don't have any topic yet, so I can't proceed. But once I type something, let's say HTML, now I will be able to proceed, which is exactly what I wanted. Now, before proceeding to the next screen, we need to be able to send the value of this variable to the app component. So the app component can make the call to the Gemini API and generate the quiz questions. Now, how do we pass values from a child component to the parent component? Let's go to the documentation and check. Now here under components in depth, if we go to props, this is how we pass a value from a parent to a child component. So scrolling down here, let's see an example. This one is good. We can see that if we created this component from a parent component, we could pass it as a prop called greeting message. Same thing here. We have a blog post. We can pass a title to the child component. But this is not what we want. What we want to do is the opposite. We want to pass a value from the child to the parent component. So let's go to events And this is how we are going to do it. Once we click the button, we are going to emit an event to the parent component. And when we emit that event, we can send a value with it. So I just wanted to show you where you can find this in the documentation in case you're not very experienced with Vue.js. So throughout the whole project, I'm going to be coming back here to show why I'm doing things. So let's go back to the project. When we call this component from the app component, we are going to create a new event. And this event can be fired from inside the start screen. So for that, we are going to add the @ as if we were adding @click or @mouse over, but instead we are going to create our own custom event. We can call it start quiz. There's a convention to use the kebab case, which is to have everything in lowercase and separate words with dashes. If you go to the documentation, you can see that you can use the camel case like start quiz, but there is a convention to write it like this so it matches other attributes of HTML elements. So we are going to use this convention and call this event start quiz. Once this event is fired from inside the child component, we are going to fire a function from the parent. So this function, we can name it with the camel case. So I'm going to name it start quiz. Now let's create this function so we know if this is working. So we need to create a function with that name. It's going to be called start quiz. So now we are going to create an arrow function like this, and we can just do an alert just to see if this is working. All right, so the event has been created. Once we fire it, this is going to execute the start quiz function. And how do we fire this event? We need to go inside the child component. And before using this event, we need to declare it. So I'm going to create a new variable called emit. Let's use the define emits function from VueJS. And here we are going to pass an array of events. For now, we only have one called start quiz. So remember that the function that I created in the app component is written like this, but it's not the function we are passing, but the event. So this is how we are passing the event to the child component, and this is how we need to use it inside here. Now we can go to the button, and when we click the button, so let's use the click event, what we are going to do is emit that event to the parent component. So we can use emit start quiz. So if this is working correctly, when we click this button, we are going to emit the event to the app component. When we emit this event, we are going to run this function from the parent. Let's see if this is working. Everything is saved. I'm going to choose a topic. I'm going to click start quiz, and we can see that the function is being fired correctly. Now, the only thing we need to do here is to pass the topic. So for this function, I'm going to add the topic as an argument. And let's add it to the alert, just so we can see if this is working correctly. Now inside the start screen, if you want to pass values when you emit events, you can just add a comma and pass the value you want. In this case, we want to pass the topic, which we know is already a reactive variable. So we are going to pass the topic. And now if everything is working correctly, once we click the button, we are going to fire the function and we are going to pass the topic so we can start connecting with Google Gemini. Let's try it out. Let's try HTML, click start quiz, and we can see that the parent component already has access to the topic. Let's try another one, JavaScript. So we are being able to pass the topic correctly. So let's go to the Gemini documentation on ai.google.dev. Let's go to models, Gemini, docs. Let's start with a simple text generation example, and then we can change the approach to have a JSON response. So I'm going to copy all of this, and we can delete this line and paste the code inside here. We just need to make a few adjustments because this import line can be done at the top of the component. And for this to work with Vue.js, we're going to have to install this dependency. So let's copy this let's go to the terminal and let's type npm install or npm I and paste the name of the library. Now this is done. We can close the terminal. If we go to the package.json file, we can see that this has been added to the project. Now here, let's replace our API key. If you don't have one yet, just go to aistudio.google.com, go to Get API Key, and you can click this button to create a new API key. I already have one, so I'm just going to use it. Remember that this is not a safe way to store your API key, so if you're planning on taking this app to production, I'm going to leave a link at the top right corner of the screen where you can learn how to make this request server-side with an Express server. Alright, so we create a new Google Generative AI instance. We call the Gemini 1.5 Flash model. Let's work on the prompt. So for this, I'm going to use the backticks so we can insert the topic here dynamically. Let's ask it to create a multi-choice quiz question about. Then we can insert the topic here with $ curly braces. Now we are going to await for the result. This is being highlighted because we need this function to be asynchronous. So let's add the async at the top here. Now once we receive the result, we are going to do something with the result. Now instead of sending it to the console, let's show it on screen so we see if this is working. So for this, we are going to need to create a state variable. So remember, we did the same here. We need to import ref first. We can do it here. And then I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this question. So this is going to be a ref variable, and the initial value is going to be blank. Now after the start screen, just so we can test, I'm going to add a p tag, and I'm going to show the question. As you can see, we don't see anything because this variable is blank. But if we add a test here and save, we will see it showing down here. So now when we receive this back, we can assign a value to that variable. Even though this is a constant, we can do this because this is a ref variable. So what we need to do here is the following. We do question dot value is going to receive whatever we get from Google. Now, before we test this out, just so we see a little bit of a loader state, right in the beginning of this function, we can do question dot value. And let's type something like loading question. So this is the text we should show down here. Then we are going to connect with Google AI. And when we receive the question, we are going to replace the value. Let's save this. Let's test if this is working. I'm going to ask for a JavaScript quiz question. So I'm going to click Start Quiz. We can see loading question, and then we receive it back from Google. This is a quiz question. So which of the following is the correct way to declare a constant variable in JavaScript? And here we have the options. Google is also sending us the correct answer. So this is really cool. This is the starting point for our quiz. But of course, this is not how we want to receive the answer because it's going to be very hard to work with this result. We need to be able to have the question and the options in separate objects so we can create the UI the way we want. So for that, we are going to need a structured response in JSON. So let's go to the Gemini documentation. For this first example, we use this basic text generation code. But for what we need, and especially because we're going to be working with more questions at a time, we need this response to come in JSON. So in the documentation, remember we are at ai.google.dev. You can go to Models, Gemini, Docs, and then go to Structured Output. This is what we need. This is going to ensure that we receive a response in JSON. Now let's scroll down to this more complex example that has a JSON schema. We're going to use ChatGPT to generate the schema for us. So here we already have the Google Generative AI instance. We're just going to copy the schema. The model is going to have to be the Gemini 1.5 Pro. So let's copy the whole thing all the way to the end. Now going back there, we can start at the top here. And this is going to be the code we're going to use for this example. But now we need to create a suitable schema. So let me go back to the browser, and the model I'm going to use for this is going to be one used by the OpenTrivia API. This is the API that I used on almost all previous examples I've made in the past. When I wanted to do a quiz, I used this on my React and VueJS courses, and I think this is a very good API for students to practice. So let me show you one example. I'm going to ask for one question in the category of computers, easy, multiple choice, and let's generate the API URL. So in this API, if we use this URL, let me paste it in the browser, this is how we receive the answer. If you are not seeing the result like this is because I have an extension called JSON View. So this is why it's correctly formatted like this. So this is what we're going to use for our example. We're going to receive a JSON like this. So all the questions will be inside the results property. Here, this is going to be an array of questions. So in this example, I only asked for one question. So here it is. And the question is going to be a type, difficulty, category, the question. Then we're going to have the correct answer and the incorrect answers. This is going to be enough for us to build the UI and let the user interact with the quiz. So I'm going to copy all this and I'm going to go to ChatGPT so we can build the schema. So let's type something like, I need help to generate a JSON schema for quiz questions. The response must look like this. So then we paste the format we need. It is not mandatory that you use this, but again, since I already used this API many times, I think this is a good format that will allow us to easily create the UI for the quiz. So this is the format we are looking for, and let's also pass the code that we have in the Gemini documentation so we can ask ChatGPT to adjust the example for this format. Use the same format as shown in the Gemini documentation. So let's send it. And this way, we have exactly what we want, and we don't have to waste our time creating the schema. So this is the kind of thing I like using AI to help me out. So I'm going to copy this. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's replace the variable for the schema. So now we are calling the Gemini 1.5 Pro model, and we are asking the response to come in JSON. And the model is going to use the schema we just provided. Now let's adjust the prompt. This time I'm going to ask to generate 5 quiz questions, so we can see if that array is going to work correctly. Let's remember to do it with the backticks instead of quotation marks, so we can add dynamic values. And here we are going to insert the topic. If you want, you can add more specific instructions like difficulty, the type. And I think that's good for now. If we need, we can work more on this prompt later on. So this should be enough for us to receive 5 quiz questions about our topic. Now let's remember to save the result in that state variable. So we have it right here, question. Since this is a ref value, we need to use .value. So we are going to replace the value by what we receive from Google Gemini. And before we show anything on screen, let's do a console.log just so we can see how this response is going to come. Let's save this. Let me open the inspector. I'm going to put it below so we can have a better view of this. Let me open the console. So, refreshing the page, let me generate questions about HTML. Start quiz. Now there's an error because we are using schema type. If we scroll up, we can see we use it a few times for the type of values that we are using. So array, strings, etc. And in order to use this, we need to import this from Google Generative AI as well. So let's add at the top here. Save this and let's try again. So now we are loading the question. We wait a few seconds and we are receiving an array with the questions. So we can see that the first one is, what is the correct HTML tag for the largest heading? And then we have the correct answer, which is age 1. And we have the incorrect answers, which are head, header, and heading. And we can now start building the UI to let the user interact with our quiz. So for that, we're going to create a few new components. So remember that this is the app component. And we start the application seeing the start screen. Now, once we receive the answer back from Google Gemini, we want to see the quiz component instead. So for that, let's go to the components folder, add a new file called quiz. Remember to use capital letters for your components, quiz.vue. Let me add a template. I'm going to create a section with a class of quiz. Let me also add a class of container, just so we can keep things aligned. And for now, I'm just going to add an h2 and write quiz component, just so we can test if we are able to pass to this screen. Now here we are going to use something very interesting, which is called Declarative UI. If you want to learn more about this topic, you can just go to Google and search for Declarative UI versus Imperative UI. Take a moment to explore this topic because you will see that Declarative UI is much more suitable for modern web applications to keep things clean and maintainable. So the basic difference here is that in Declarative UI, instead of manually hiding and showing elements, so we could come here and when we receive the result back from Gemini, we could hide the start screen and then show the quiz screen. So this would be Imperative UI, when you manually set the behaviors you want. What we are going to use and what I suggest you use on all your applications is a bit different. We are going to have a status for the application, and the screen that's going to show will depend on the current status. So we won't have to be manually changing between screens. Let me show you how this works. I'm going to scroll up inside the app component, and I'm going to create another state variable. I'm going to call this one status. And this is going to start with a value of start. So what we're going to do here is the following. We are going to decide which screen is going to show based on that status. So right here, I'm going to add a if. And this component is only going to show if status is start. In the template, we don't have to do status.value. This is only needed in the script section. Here we can just do status equals start. So if this is true, we are going to show this component. If we save this now, we can see that we are still seeing the component because the status is indeed start. But if we change the value of this variable, let's say to quiz, now we don't see that component anymore. So this is what Declarative UI is. The screen that's going to be shown depends on the status of the application. And this is going to make the logic very easy to maintain. Now that we created a component for the quiz, we can just import it at the top here. So let's import the quiz component. And down here, we are going to create the element for this component. And this is only going to show if the status is, we can call it quiz, but I prefer to call it ready. So once we receive the questions, I'm going to change the status to ready. And another cool thing we can do is do the same thing for the loader. So we are also going to have a loader component, which is going to make it possible for us to add a nicer loader. Right here at the top, remember we were changing the value of the question variable to loading, which is not ideal because this has nothing to do with the question. So we can delete this line from here. And instead, we are going to create another component for the loader. So let's add the template. And here we just need a section just so we can have the paddings correct. And we need a div with a class of loader. And that's all we need for this component. If you go to the CSS file, you will see that I added the CSS for the loader. So if we use this component, let's add it right here. And this one is only going to show if the status is loading. Now this is all we need for now, and this makes the logic very simple because we're just going to be changing the status of the application. Now we can go up. Let's not forget to import the loader. And this is going to make the logic very simple. We are going to start the application with a status of start, and then we are going to see this screen. Once we do the request to the Gemini API, we are going to change the status to loading, and we are going to see the loader showing. And once we receive the answer, we are going to change the status to ready. And then we are going to see the quiz component. So this is the Declarative UI. And like I said, I encourage you to search more about this topic because this is a very important one. So let's put this back to start. And right here, right before making the request to Gemini, we are going to do status.value, and we are going to change it to loading. Then we are going to make the request. And once we receive the question back from Gemini, we are going to change the status to ready. We still need to do some error handling here, but let's leave this for another time. Let's test this out. So now we have three components: the start screen, the loader, and the quiz. And the one that will show depends on the status of the application. So now we are just getting started. We are seeing the start screen. Let's ask for questions about HTML and start the quiz. And now we see the loader. We wait for the response. And once we receive the response from Gemini, we see the quiz component. If we go to the inspector, let's go to the console, we can see that the questions have been received. So this is super cool. Now we just need to start working on the UI for the quiz component so we can display the questions to the user. So for that, let's remember that we have the questions in the app component in a variable called question. I'm now going to change it to questions because let's remember that this is an array of questions. We are now asking 5 questions at a time. So we have questions right here. When we receive it back, let's adjust down here as well. So now we have an array of questions. Same thing here. Actually, we don't have to send it to the console anymore because we will be able to see it from the child component. Now we need a way to pass these questions to the quiz component. And we are going to do this using props. So let's go to the VueJS documentation. And if you want to read more about it, you can go under Components in Depth to the props section. Here you are going to learn more about how to work with props. So back to the project, we are going to create a new prop right here. We are going to add it as an attribute of this element, so we can call it the same name of the variable. In this case, it is questions. Now here, if we were passing a literal value like hello, we could just pass it like this. But we are passing a dynamic value. And to pass dynamic values, we need to add the column. So this is going to make sure we can add a variable instead of a hard-coded value. In this case, we want to pass the questions variable. So we do this, and then inside the quiz component, we also need to do something. So before the template, let's start the script tag. Don't forget to add the setup. And in order to have access to the prop, we need to declare it. So let's create a new variable called props. And let's use the define props function from VueJS. Just like with emits, we are going to pass an array of props. So in this case, we are going to pass one called questions. Now, how do we know if we're getting the questions correctly? Let's do a console.log. And in this case, we need to access through the props variable. So props.questions. Now let's open the inspector, go to the console, and we can see that we are being able to receive this value from inside the child component. Now, the only thing that is interesting to us here is what's inside the results property. But we need to be a bit careful because this is not a JavaScript object yet. This is still a string. So instead of sending props.questions, let's try to send props.questions.results. And when we do this, we can see an undefined value. This is because we haven't converted this to a JavaScript object yet. So let's go back to the app component. And right here, we are going to add a JSON.parse to convert this into a JavaScript object. We save this. Let's try again. And now we can see that we are being able to access the questions. So what we're going to do here is the following. Instead of passing everything to the child component, we're just going to pass the questions, which is inside results. We are going to need the response code to do error handling, but this is going to be done from the app component later. The child component only needs to receive the questions. So we are going to do this. Now we go inside the quiz component. And right here, we are going to have the questions, which means we can start presenting it to the user. So if we go inside this array, go to the target, we can see the 5 questions right here. So we have a category, we have the correct answer, difficulty, the incorrect answers, the question, and the type. So let's make a quick UI just so we can present the question. Right after the age 2, let's add a div with a class of question. Remember to use the exact same elements and classes as I'm using so you don't have any problems with the styles. So here I'm going to add an age 3. I'm going to add the double curly braces, and I'm going to try to show props.questions. And I'm going to show the content of the first question, which is index 0. And I want to show the property called question. If I save this now, we can see that now I'm showing the question to the user, which is really cool. If I want to show the second question, I can just change the index right here. Now this is the next question sent by Gemini, the next question, and you see the point. Now, of course, this is not going to be done manually. So before we present the options, let's work on the logic to control what is the current question. So at the top here, I'm going to create a new state variable. So for that, I'm going to copy this line of code so we can use ref, and let's create a new variable called current question. This is going to be a ref variable, and the initial value is going to be 0. So right here, instead of manually adding the index, we are going to use the dynamic value of current question. We do this, and now we are showing the first question. Now the next thing we need to do is to present the options so the user can select. But before we work on that, let's just add the button down here, which is going to be the one the user will click to go to the next question. So let's add a button. We can name it send. And here we are going to add a click event. And what we could do would be just to increment the current question. So we could do current question plus plus. Remember that in the template, we don't have to use dot value. So we could do this, and when we click send, we are going to go to the next question. But I don't think it's a good idea to do it from here because we're not just going to go to the next question. We also need to store the answer so we can present the results later. So the best thing we can do here is to have a dedicated function to do all this. So let's create one called submit answer. Let's create an arrow function. And one of the things we are going to do is to increment the current question. Since we are now from the script tag, we need to use dot value. So here we can just use the incremental operator. Now right here, we're going to execute the submit answer instead. So every time we click the button, we are going to run all this logic right here. We can save this, and when we click send, the result is going to be the same as we had before. But the difference is that now we are ready to start presenting the options, collecting the user answer, and submitting it when clicking the button. So right after the question and right before the send button, we are going to start a new div with a class of answers, and we are going to add a button for each of the options. So let's add a button. This is going to have a class of answer. So we have a different style than the send button. Remember to use the same classes so you don't have any problems. Now another thing we're going to do is to start a loop because we want one button for each options we have. So to do this in VueJS, we are going to use the v-for loop. So the v-for is going to create an answer for each of the answers we have. So in this case, this is going to be props.questions. Then we can use the current question as the index. Now let's see the name of the properties we have. So let's go to the inspector. Let me go to the Vue DevTools, to the quiz component. So here we have the array of questions, and each of them has an array called incorrect answers. So for each of them, let me go inside the incorrect underscore answers. We are going to create a variable called answer that we can access inside the loop. Now to make this loop run efficiently, we need to add a dynamic key, which must be unique. So colon key, and we can use answer as the key. And we also need to add the text content of the button, which is going to be the answer itself. So for this, we can add the double curly braces inside the button and add the answer right here. Now let me close the inspector, and if I save this now we have all the options showing as buttons, which is really cool. However, this is not quite what we need yet, because remember that here we only have the incorrect answers, and we need to add the correct answer to the options as well. And we need to add it to a random position so it doesn't show every time in the same location. For example, if we just push the correct answer to this array, the correct one is always going to be the last one. So the user will very soon notice this pattern. So in order to add it to a random position, I think the best way to do this in VueJS is through a computed property. If you want to learn more about computed properties, you can go to the documentation, go inside computed properties, and you are going to have some examples. So if we scroll down here, we can see that we can create it just like a variable, but we need to import computed from Vue. So let's copy this example and let's go back there. So scrolling up, first we are going to import computed from Vue, and we are going to create a variable called shuffled options. And right here, we can create a new variable for the options. And the first thing we are going to do here is to get it from the incorrect answers. But if we just do this, we might be affecting the original array. So the best thing we do is to create a new array, and we bring only the values of the original array. Now this is the safe way of doing this. Now another thing that we need to adjust here is because remember that when using ref variables, which is the case for the current question, if we are using it in the template, we can just call it by its name. But when we are using it from the script setup, we need to bring in the value property. So this is one adjustment we need to make. And just to see if this is working, let's just return the options. So if this is working correctly, we're going to have the same thing as we had before. But this time, we can copy this. And instead of looping through the incorrect answers, let's loop through the computed properties. And let's see if the result is going to be the same. So we save this, and we can see that we didn't have any change, which is good. Now we can go ahead and add the correct answer to this as well. So for this, we can just do options.splice. And this is a native JavaScript method that will add elements to an array in a specific position. To test if this is working, let's add something to the position 0, which is going to be the first of the array. Now we need to define the delete count if we want to delete any elements when we add new ones. In this case, we don't want to delete anything. We just want to add the correct answer. So 0 for the delete count. And here, which element we are trying to include. This is the props.question.currentQuestion.value. But in this case, we want to add the correct answer. And if this is working, the correct answer is going to be added to index 0. So it's going to show at the start. Now we save this, and we can see that the correct answer is showing right here. A component's internal state. If we go to the inspector just to see if this is right, let's go to the Vue DevTools, inside the quiz, go to questions, and we can see that the correct answer is indeed a component's internal state. So we were able to add the correct answer right here. If we change the index, for example, if we want to add it at index 1, now it is going to show in the position 1. We can do it at 2. So as you can see, we can add it to any place we want. But we don't want to be manually setting it. We want to add it to a random location. And for that, I'm going to use a nice trick. This has nothing to do with VueJS or Google Gemini. This is just some basic JavaScript logic. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, but instead of adding a manual index here, what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to get a random number from math.random. And this is going to get a random number between 0 and 1. And I'm going to multiply this by the length of the options array. So for example, if the random number is 1, I'm going to multiply this by the length of the incorrect answers array, which is going to be 3, which means that we are going to position the correct answer in the last position. Again, this is just some basic JavaScript logic. However, since we can have decimal numbers, because the random method is going to return a random number between 0 and 1, we need to round this. So we can do math.round. parentheses here, parentheses at the end. And this is a nice trick we can use to always insert the correct answer in a random position of the array. Now, if we save this, we can see that now the correct one has been added to the last element. But if I change this to 1 and then go to 0 again, we can see that now it's showing in the second position. So let's try again. Let's go to the next question, return to the other one. Now this is showing in the first position. So as you can see, the correct answer will always be added to a random position in the array. So the user is not going to know which one is it. All right, so this is really cool. Now we are presenting all the options to the user. Now we just need to work on the logic to select an option and proceed. So let's choose another topic. Let's get questions about TypeScript. Now, every time we click on an option, we need to select it. And we need to store the selected option somewhere. So let's go to the quiz component, and we are going to create another ref variable for the selected option. This is going to start with a no value. All right, now every time we click the button, we are going to change the value of the selected option. So we can just go down here. Whenever we click this button, we are going to get the selected option, and we are going to do selected option equals answer. Remember that when we use ref variables from the template, we don't need to add dot value. Only when we do this from the script tag. So this should be enough to select an option, and to see if this is working right after the send button, I'm going to add a p tag just to test if we are being able to store the value in that variable. So let's output the selected option right here. We save this, let's click on classes. We can see we have classes selected, we have enums, namespaces, interfaces. So we are being able to select an answer. But we need this to be reflected in the UI so the user knows that the option is being selected. For that, I added a class called active. So if you get the button and you add a class of active, we can see that it gets this border. Of course, we don't want to add it to all the buttons, but only to the one that's selected. For this, we can add a dynamic class. And we can add a class of active if something is true. And what I want to test if it's true is if the answer is the same as the selected option. If it is, this button is going to receive the class and show the border. So we can save this now. Now we see interfaces selected and we see the selection showing. If we select something else, we can see that this is working correctly. So now we can delete this p tag from here because we know that this logic is working. So we see the answer, we selected, and this is exactly what we wanted. Before we go ahead and store the selected option and move on to the next question, I'm going to create a logic here to only show this button if there is an answer selected. Because if we refresh the page, let's generate another quiz. We can see that the send button is showing even if we don't have any option selected. And if we click on it, we are going to pass to the next one without having any selected option. So we are only going to show this button if we have something inside the selected option. So we save this now. As you can see, when we first load the question, we don't see the send button. Only after selecting some option, we see this button. All right, so now that the logic to select an option is done, we just need to store the selected answer. Remember that we created a function called submit answer because what we want to do is not just passing to the next one, but we also want to store the previous answers in a variable. Now this will have to be done in the app component because we're going to need to have access to these answers later, because when the quiz ends, we're going to have a new element here to show the result. So we are going to need access to the stored answers. So for that, let's go to the top here and let's create a new variable. I'm going to call it user answers. And this is going to start as an empty array. Now here, let's also create a function that can be called store answer. This is going to receive an answer as an argument, and we are going to do user answers.push and store the answer in that array. Now saving this, when we create the quiz component, we need to pass this as a custom event. So let's create one called store-answer. Remember that the VueJS documentation suggests we use the kebab case as the naming convention. So whenever we listen to this event from the child component, we are going to execute a local function called store-answer. Now we just need to go inside the quiz component, create a variable to register these events, just like we did here in the start screen. So I'm going to copy this, but this time the name is store answer. Now when we submit the answer, before we move on to the next one, we are going to emit that event, which is called stored answer, and we are going to send something as an argument, which is going to be the selected option. I'm not going to send only the select option because we're going to need to know which question was this. So instead, I'm going to send an object. This object is going to have two properties. One is going to be the question, which we're going to need to present it to the user as well. So this is going to be props.questions, then the current question dot value, and we are also going to send another property with the user answer. So let me break a line just so we see things better. This object is going to have the question and also the user answer, which is going to be selected option dot value. All right, so now when we click send, not only we are going to move to the next question, but we are going to store the user answer so we can use it later. So let's try this out. First, let me make the screen a bit bigger and let me bring the inspector. I'm going to open up the VueJS Dev Tools, and here we are inside the app component. So let's see what's going to happen once we select one and send. Now this is bringing an error because user answers.push is not a function. Let's go back there. So here we did user answers.push. Remember that this is a ref variable, so we need to add value here. So let's try again. Now we are seeing the user answers array showing here. It doesn't have anything inside it yet. So let's try to submit an answer. So we send it, and now we can see that the first answer has been stored. So this is an object, and we have the question. So we know exactly what was the question, what were the incorrect answers, the correct answer, so we can test later if it was correct. And we also have a property for the user answer, which is really cool because in the end of the quiz, we are going to present the detailed results to the user. So now we are almost done. Let's try a few more times. So I'm going to submit the second question. Now we can see another answer being stored here. Now again and again, and I'm going to go all the way to the end because we are going to have an error. Let me go to the console. Let's send again. And as you can see, after submitting the last one, we are having an error This is because we ran out of questions and we are not handling this. So what we need to do now is the following. In the function to submit the answer, we need to test if the current question is the last one or not. Because if it is, then we are going to send a message to the app component to finish the quiz and show the results. So before we do that, let's add a progress bar to the top of the quiz so we know exactly how many questions we have left. So let's go down right where we have the title. So for that, let's add an HTML element. Remember to use the same elements and classes I'm using so you see the correct styles. So I'm going to add a new div with a class of header. And inside, let's add the h2. I will just write quiz. And I'm going to add a p element as well. And let's type something like question x of y. We save this now. We can see that they are displaying as flex elements with space between. That's why it's important to use the same elements in classes so the CSS works correctly. Now here, obviously, we don't want to show x of y, but we want to show the actual number. So in the place of x, we're going to show the current question. But let's remember that the current question starts at 0. So we are going to add 1 to whatever question we're at. So we are going to start at question 1. In this case, I already answered a few, so that's why we're seeing 3 questions. And here we are going to show the total questions using the length of the questions array. So this is going to be props.questions.length. So now we can see we are in question 3 out of 5. This is cool, but to make this even nicer, let's add a progress bar. So let's go outside of the header element and we can create a new progress HTML element. Let's add a max attribute of 100. So this is going to be in percentage and the value is going to be a dynamic one. So colon value. Let me just break a few lines so we see things a bit better here. I'm going to end this element here. So I'm going to do the current question plus 1 divided by the length of the array. So for example, if we are in question 1 out of 5, this is going to be 1 divided by 5, which is going to result in 0.20. So then we can multiply it by 100 and we are going to have 20. As the max is 100, this is going to show 20% of the quiz completed. So let's save this. And now we see this nice progress bar. Let me restart the quiz just so we can see if this is working. Let me get one about HTML and CSS. So as you can see, question 1 out of 5, we are seeing 20% of the quiz. If you want to start at 0 instead, you can just remove the 1 from here. So as you can see, it's going to start with an empty progress bar, but I prefer to start at 20%. So once we select an option and send, we are going to see the progress bar moving. So P, hypertext markup language, cascading style sheets. And once we get to the last question, we need to be careful because when we submit the answer, we're going to have to treat it differently. So let's work on this logic. So at the top of the quiz component, remember we have a function to submit the answer. So here we can emit the event to store the answer. Now, one thing I forgot to do was to clear the selected option. So every time we submit an answer, we need to make this variable go back to no. So here we are going to add selected option.value is going to go back to no. And now before doing this part, which is going to the next question, we need to make a test. We need to test if current question dot value is the same as props dot questions dot length minus 1. Why -1? Because if we have 5 questions, let's remember that it starts from 0. So the current question is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning that 4 is the last one. So when we are at 4, which means is the array length -1, when these two numbers are the same, it means we are at the last question. So if that happens, we are going to emit an event to the parent component to end the quiz. If not, then we can go ahead and move on to the next question. Now we need to add this event right here. So we already have one called store answer, and we are going to have a new one called end quiz. Now going back to the app component, when we see that event being fired, which is called end quiz, what we are going to do is just set the value of status to finished. So let me save this and let's go all the way to the end of the quiz. I'm going to select random answers just to go fast. So 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. This is the last one. We send it and now we don't see anything anymore. Why is that? Because the status is not start, it's not loading, and it's not ready. Now the last thing we need to do is to create one last component, which I'm going to call result. So let's go to the components folder. Let's create one called result.view. Let's create a section called result screen. Also add the container, and let's add an h1 for the results. Now going back to the app component, let's not forget to import this component right here. And we are going to bring this component if the status is finished. Now, just so we have all the conditions positioned in the same location, let me bring this one to the beginning. Like this. So now we have the conditions to show each of the components. This one is going to show if the status is finished. So now we can close this component. And when we save this, we have now restarted the application. So let's do it again. Let's create one about TypeScript. So let's go real quick to finish this. Now 5 out of 5 once we send the last one. And now we land on the screen and we can display the results. If we go to the inspector, let's go to the Vue DevTools. Let's remember that we have all the user answers stored inside this ref variable. So the first thing we need to do is to pass this to the result component. I'm going to create a dynamic prop with the colon, so user answers is going to receive user answers. Now let's remember that we need to declare the props. So I'm going to copy this line from the quiz component and reuse it here. Let's add the script tag at the top. Don't forget to add the setup. And first, we create the props. This is going to be called user answers. And now that we have access to the answers from inside this component, we can start presenting the results. So right after the h1, I'm going to add an unordered list, and I'm going to add an li for each of the answers. So right here, let's run a loop. So v4 answer in props dot user answers. Let's also add an index so we can use it as the key. Remember, we need this so the loop runs efficiently. Now for the content of this li, First, I'm going to add the question in bold. So remember that in the variable that we are storing the user answers, we have a property called question and one called user answer. So first, let's get the question. So this is going to be inside the answer variable that's created in the loop. So answer dot question. If you want to see what you have inside, you can always go to the VueJS DevTools. Go inside the result. You can see the user answers. For each of them, you can see you have the question and you have the user answer. Inside the question, you have all the original properties from the question. So what we're trying to show here is question.question. Then let's add a P so we can present the user answer, which is going to be answer.user answer. And we can add another P to show the correct answer. So this is inside answer dot question dot correct answer. And here I included an extra S right here, so it's just user answer, and here correct answer. All right, let me close the inspector, and if I save this now, we are going to see all the answers shown below. So here we have the user answer and the correct answer. This is super cool, but we need something more visual to show the user which ones were correct and which ones weren't. So we are going to add some specific classes. Let's start with the li. So I'm going to add a dynamic class right here. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to test if answer.question.correct answer is the same as the user answer. If it is, it means that it was correct. So in this case, by using a ternary conditional, I'm going to define a class of correct. If not, colon, I will define a class of incorrect. If I do this, now we are going to see the borders changing colors. I have all in green because I answered all of them correctly. But the way this works, if you go to the CSS file, you will see that for the LIs, I defined a border color for the correct class and one for the incorrect class. So this is already better, but I think we can make this even better. Let's add HTML entities for the correct and for the incorrect check marks. So if you go to Google and you search for HTML entity check mark, so we can see that if we use the HTML entity 9989, we are going to show this symbol. So what I'm going to do here is the following. Before showing the question, I'm going to add another p tag, add a v-html directive, and I'm going to make the same test as I did for the class. So if we have the correct answer, the HTML of this p tag is going to be that HTML entity for the check mark, which is and hashtag 9989. If not, I'm going to show the HTML entity for incorrect, which I don't have to search now because I know it is hashtag 160. Let's not forget to add semicolon at the end of the HTML entity. All right, we can save this, and now we are going to see these symbols at the top. So now the visuals are much better. Let's try again so we have some of them wrong, so we can see how cool this is going to look. So let's answer this one correctly. Let's answer this one incorrectly so we can see it. One correct, another one incorrect now. Let's see the result. Now we don't see the check mark for incorrect because it was 60, not 600. So let me correct it. And now we can see the correct ones. So now we can see that the visuals are really, really nice. We are presenting the results to the user and showing which ones were correct and which ones were incorrect. Now, one last thing I want to add here, when presenting the results, instead of just writing results, I want to tell the users how many questions were correct. So for that, we're going to need a computed property. Let's remember that to do that, we need to import computed from Vue. So let's copy this line. Here we don't need ref, only computed. Let's remember that this is how we create a computed property. So let's reuse this code here. Let me delete everything, and this one is going to be called correct answers count. And this one is going to return the props dot user answers. We're going to apply a filter to this array, and we are going to return only the ones where the user answer is the same as question dot correct answer. So this way, we are going to have a new array with only the ones where these two match, and what we want is the length of this new array. So now we are going to change the title to "You have answered." Then we can use that computed property out of, then we get the length, the total length of the user answers. So this is going to be props dot user answers dot length. Then we write questions correctly. So we save this, and now this is how we are going to see the results. You have answered 2 out of 5 questions correctly, which looks much nicer. Now I promise there's just one last improvement that I want to add here. So let's restart. Let's choose HTML again. Now let me answer all of them correctly. Now we can see you have answered 5 out of 5 questions correctly. We can see all of them showing as correct. What I want to add here is the following. Just in case we have all of them answered correctly, I want to add an extra H1 at the top. So we add a congratulations message. So this is only going to show if the correct answers count is the same as user answers.length. In this case, it means that all of the answers were correct. So we can add a congratulations. So now this is showing because we answered all of them correctly. To make this even nicer, let's search for the HTML entity of the confetti emoji. So we have it right here. And right before the congratulations, we can add the confetti emoji. And this is going to look like this if we have all of the questions answered correctly. So this is going to show this first line with the congratulations message and the confetti if we have all of the questions answered correctly. Alright, so now we're done with the basic functionality of the VueJS and Gemini quiz generator. We still need to make some improvements. The first one we need to do is some error handling. This is because if there's something wrong with the request, we're going to have a breaking error to the application. So to simulate that, I'm going to go up where I create the Google Generative AI instance, and I'm going to enter a wrong API key. So I'm going to add an underscore in the beginning, and this is going to produce an error. Let's see how this is going to reflect in the UI. So let's try a quiz about JavaScript. Now we can see that the loader is showing forever. If we go to the inspector, we can see that the application is already broken. We have an error because the API key is wrong, but we are not hiding the loader again, and we are not letting the user know that there's something wrong. So this is something that shouldn't be this way. What we're going to do here is the following. We don't have to include everything inside the try-catch block because it's going to be harder to read the code. These things are not going to produce any errors. So we are going to create the model. This is where the error will happen if there is some. So we are going to create a try-catch block here. And we are going to add this part of the code inside the try. So if everything works correctly, then we are going to save the result and change the status to ready. But if there's something wrong, we're going to go back the status to start, which is the one that will bring back the initial screen. We could have a status for error, but I don't think we need one because my idea is the following. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a state variable for an error message. So we can call it error, which is going to start as an empty string. If there is an error, we are going to do error dot value. Then we are going to save the error message right here. Actually, we need to change this to error message so it doesn't conflict with the error from the try-catch block. So let's adjust at the top as well. And what I'm going to do is pass this to the start component. So for the start screen, I'm going to pass the error message as a prop. Remember, this must be a dynamic prop. So let's add the colon like this. And don't forget that when we use props, we need to declare them. So in the start screen, let's register the error message prop. And in case we have an error, right after the button, I'm going to add a small HTML element with a class of error, which is going to bring in the correct text color. I'm going to show this only if there is an error message. And if there is, I'm going to show the error message. So we restart the application. Let's try again. Let's try creating a quiz about TypeScript. Let's click to start the quiz. And as you can see, we have an error. So instead of staying in the loader forever, what we did was we went back to the first screen so that the user can try again. And we are showing that there is an error. Of course, this is not a good thing to be showing to the user. So if you want, you can just store the error message just so we know if we have an error or not and decide if we're going to show this element or not. But here we can write our own error message, which in this case is going to be, there was an error. Please try again later. So we start the application. There's nothing here. We're going to try sending the request. There's an error. And as you can see, this is much better for the user. Now, if we go back there and we correct the API key, and we try again, all right, now we got to the end of it. And the last thing I want to add here is a button to restart the quiz. So let's go to the result component. And right at the end, after the UL, I'm going to add a button. We can type create a new quiz. So this is right here. And when we click this button, we're going to have to emit an event to the parent component. So we are going to emit an event and we can call it restart quiz. Now for this to work, remember we need to declare the emits. So let's go here just so we can copy this line of code. So emit, we're going to create one called restart quiz. When we click the button, we're going to emit this event. So on the app component side, we need to pass this event to the result component. So we are going to pass one called restart quiz, which on this side is going to fire a function called restart quiz, this time with camel case. Now we just need to go up and create this function. So let's create it right here. And since we are using Declarative UI, the only thing we need to do is refresh these variables for the initial values. Because if we do that, if we refresh the status to start and we erase the questions, the answers, and everything, then the application will go back to show the start screen component. So this is the advantage of using Declarative UI, because we don't have to overcomplicate the logic. So we can just copy all this. We just need to make a few changes. We are going to remove the const keyword. Also the refs. And we need to add .value because these are ref variables and we are accessing them from the script tag. So we are going to set the values of all of them to the initial values. Now we can save this, and one thing we need to do before we test this, when we go to the quiz, right here when we end the quiz, there's just one thing that I forgot to do, which is to clear the current question. Because if we want to keep this application running and start a new quiz, once we go in this component again, we need to make sure that this is set to 0 again. Since the component will be destroyed when we go to the next screen, this is probably not going to be a problem anyway. But I always like to be safe and do this. So remember, we are always clearing the selected option. But in the case we are finishing the quiz, right before doing it, I also like to get the current question and put it back to 0. Now this is going to ensure we're not going to have any problems in controlling the current question. All right, we are now ready to test this out. Let's choose a different topic. I will just select some random answers just so we can go fast. All right, so now we see the results screen. Let's try clicking the button to create a new quiz. And as you can see, we refresh the values of those variables and we are back to the start. So let's choose another topic. And as you can see, we were able to restart the quiz. So we are done with the basic functionality of this project. I know this was a bit long, but I wanted to go through all the steps instead of just showing how to integrate Gemini. I wanted to do all the parts with you. So in the future, if you want to build a similar project, you already know all the steps you need to take. Thank you so much for watching this video. That was all for today. Please check out the link for my complete Gen AI for web apps course that I left right in the description below. In the course, I'm gonna guide you through all those steps on how to build this app from start to finish, plus other 3 incredible projects, including the famous Chatbot Assistant. So if you're serious about building AI web apps and taking your skills to the next level, make sure to check out the course below. Thanks again, and please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay tuned to more AI tutorials. I'm Ivan Gomez, and I will see you next time.